Hello and good evening. My name is David Hutchinson. I'm the Assistant Director for Capital and Asset Management with the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget. We're here tonight to talk about one of my favorite topics, which is the 2023 capital budget. There's going to be 3 virtual meetings this year on different portions of the budget. This format allows us to do kind of a deeper dive on specific subjects and allow people who are reviewing the meetings afterwards on YouTube the chance to hone in on things that they're interested in as well. First, I want to start off by saying thank you to the Office of Neighborhood Services, the Department of Innovation and Performance, and our ASL interpreters tonight. We really could not make this happen without your efforts. So thank you so much for putting in so much work to get these done. A couple quick notes. We have 2 more of these meetings. So next Wednesday on June 8th, we're going to be meeting with the Urban Redevelopment Authority, the Department of Permits, Licenses, and Inspections, and other city departments to talk about economic development and community-based projects. Also talk about our community development block grants a little bit. And then the next day on Thursday, June 9th, we're going to be talking about recreation projects. So parks, playgrounds, ball fields, swimming pools, all the fun outdoor stuff, our rec centers, our senior centers. We're going to be talking those projects over with the Department of Public Works and City Parks. Just want to do a quick accessibility check. If anybody's having any trouble seeing the interpreter or hearing the sound of my voice, please chime in. Also, please let me know if there's any acronyms that can be cleared up. We have a live chat going and city staff are monitoring it. So if there's anything I use an acronym for, please feel free to pop a question in there. We can get it answered. I just want to pause in case there's any accessibility concerns at this time. Okay, great. So tonight we have a pretty deep agenda. It seems short, but trust me, there's a lot to talk about on each subject. We're going to give you a quick overview of the capital budget, talking specifically about what's inside it and also how it's made. Then we're going to hear from the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. There's some really interesting people I've had the luck to work with over the past few years on the call tonight who are going to talk about their jobs and the projects that they do in your neighborhoods. Then we're going to get into a question and answer session where you'll have the opportunity to ask questions about transportation and mobility projects. And then we're going to wrap up with some other opportunities for input. We hope to give you tools and resources that you can really share with your neighbors and your friends so that their voice can be heard in the capital budget process as well. So when thinking about the capital budget, there's kind of 3 main rules that are in our city code. The first is that the money needs to go towards the design, the building, the restoration, the retaining or the purchase of a city-owned asset. That's a really crucial part. It needs to be something that's city-owned. Also, the asset should have a minimum value of $50,000 and a minimum useful life of 5 years. We're going to get into kind of the gray areas with those in just a couple slides. But if you're thinking about the capital budget versus the operating budget, the capital budget is more of the physical environment. It's infrastructure, it's the built environment, it's streets and sidewalks, street lights, all the things you kind of see when you leave your house. The operating budget is things like salaries and pension obligations, our employee health care, office supplies, some of the smaller equipment that our staff use in their day-to-day operations. So in the real world, we want to look at examples specific to our topic tonight. So with transportation, there's a lot of different tools in the toolbox when it comes to traffic control and traffic calming. On the top row, we have some of our capital budget assets. Signalized intersections, a new set of signals at an intersection can easily cost $250,000. They're going to last for decades. It's a great capital asset. We're also doing some new things like raised crosswalks I think this one was in Squirrel Hill, that are part of our capital program. Whenever we put money into complete streets, that can go towards those type of projects like elevated crosswalks, and also bollards and paint for some of our bike and pedestrian infrastructure that can cost easily $100,000 a mile. So those are part of our capital budget as well. On the bottom, we have some really important assets that just aren't part of the capital program. Our sign shop does some really amazing work day to day. I haven't been down there. I've seen pictures of it. I need to make a trip myself, but they do an excellent job in keeping everybody in order in a really clean visual way with their day-to-day work. All their supplies are paid for out of the operating budget. Staff costs are too. DOMI also runs programs like the Pittsburgh Safe Driving Pledge through the operating budget using staff costs and supply costs there. And this is actually the crossing guard from my neighborhood. This is Kathy Gamble on the bottom right-hand corner, a great neighborhood asset. Kathy's salary, I believe, is paid out of, I know it's paid out of the operating budget, but I believe it comes out of public safety. You can see there's a bunch of different ways in which we try to solve problems as government, and we pay for them in different ways too. So we're going to have a few quick questions tonight just to try to keep everybody on their toes. The first one, we're going to look at the 4 different projects and try to guess which one is the most expensive to replace. So on the top hand side, and keep in mind it's capital, so we're not just doing maintenance. That's in the operating budget. We're doing full replacement. If we had to replace the value, every single part of it, how much would it cost? What would be the most expensive? So you can put your answer in the chat if you'd like to. On the top right hand side, we have the South 10th Street Bridge that connects uptown to the south side. This street right here is East Carson Street, also on the south side. It's a very wide road. If you think about having to drill down a few different layers to get to the sub base to replace everything, sometimes you've got to do new utilities and the sidewalk, that can get really pricey. Also over here on the right hand side, we have Bog Station. A lot of our transit stops can be in hilly areas. There could be a really long concrete switchback that requires a lot of engineering. That could get really, really pricey. And of course, Pittsburgh Classic, the Liberty Tunnels down here on the bottom. That's definitely a major piece of infrastructure. There's 2 different ways you can go through that. I'm sure the closures alone, the staffing for that on a capital project will be really pricey. So if you want to register in the first poll what you think the most expensive is, now's a great chance to put that in. And then David, whenever you're ready with the results.
All right, so of the 25 people who answered, 52% say the Liberty Tunnels.
The short answer is I don't know. These aren't city-owned assets. This was actually a trick question, but I do agree with these. I think that tunnels are definitely expensive. It seems like the higher and lower you get from the right-of-way, the more expensive things get. So tunnels would definitely be on my list. The engineering required for new bridges also super expensive. So I think those are both solid guesses. But there's a lot of infrastructure that you're interacting with every single day that you may even consider to be part of the fiber of the fabric of your neighborhood's identity that the city doesn't own. There's all kinds of partnerships we have. The county owns some of our most beautiful bridges, especially connecting with the north side. PennDOT owns a lot of our major roadways, including East Carson Street, including portions of Butler Street in Lawrenceville as well. Bog Station is a Port Authority asset. Port Authority has an amazing set of infrastructure that they need to take care of in their own budget. I'm thankful that they have their own wherewithal to do that. And the Liberty Tunnels also are a well-known PennDOT asset. There's actually a great Rick Seebeck piece on those if you ever get a chance to check it out. So it's important to keep in mind that capital projects can be pretty complicated. They can take up multiple phases, which means multiple millions of dollars over multiple years. The staff with DOMI, when they're doing a project, Department of Mobility and Infrastructure, when they're doing a project like reconfiguring Smithfield Street downtown, they take this into consideration. They do really careful planning when they're making capital budget proposals. So what you're seeing right now on screen, this little snip is from an actual capital budget proposal that the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure submitted to us for the 2022 capital budget that phased out the different funding needs that they're going to need all the way up through 2024. Many capital projects have kind of 3 basic phases: planning, design, and construction. But some of the more complicated projects actually have multiple sub phases within that. You can have 3 different iterations of designing it, 10%, 60%, 90% drawings. You can do a few different types of planning, whether it's schematic or conceptual. In construction, sometimes it makes sense to actually chop the project up into discrete pieces, do the phases over time so that there's constantly some infrastructure available to link roads together. Those are really important considerations that DOMI as project staff go through whenever they're writing proposals to us. For the capital budget, though, we're only really legislating the next year. So this snippet from the 2022 capital budget, we're only legislating this year in blue, 2022. That's all that we're legally really putting our number down for. But in terms of best practice for our office, we still want to do planning for the outer years to make sure that we're understanding the type of debt we're going to need in the future, the type of grant requests we want to make in the future, and our funding needs to make sure that we're able to see projects all the way through to the finish line. We could end up front loading the project and putting all the money we need in the very first year, but there's a few problems with that. The first is that it can be wildly inaccurate. Commodity costs we've seen skyrocket over the last few months. So a number that we would have had in 2019 may not be accurate anymore in 2024. The other is it's not a good use of money to have it sit. We want to have the money available to the department just in time for the phase that they need it. In a perfect world, they're submitting their last invoices in December and they're ready for new money come January. That's the ideal, so that your tax dollars aren't sitting, so that they're constantly being put into use, and you can see those changes out in the world. So with that, we actually do a 6-year capital improvement plan. This is what the summary of that from the 2022 budget looks like. And what this is really just the individual project out of your phases, just kind of stacked on top of each other. We do some planning with things that are more placeholder, because a lot of projects, or not a lot of projects, some projects only need 1 year. Paving is really a 1-year project. A lot of our sidewalk projects are really just 1-year projects. So those ones we may not have, years 4, 5, 6 already planned out, but we know we need to be responsible and keep a placeholder there of $500,000 for sidewalks or of $20 million for paving, so that future generations have the same kind of quality of infrastructure that we have now. So that's some of the planning that we do whenever we're talking about the capital improvement plan. It's that kind of micro project level phased up into a larger 6-year plan for the entire city. Quiz number 2. So this is a fun one. I actually was lucky enough to participate in this project. In May of 2018, the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure published a citywide steps assessment, including a prioritization of city steps based on some really crucial data, including the demographic information of the people nearby who'd be likely to use the steps. Also, the impact of the pedestrian network of having those steps go offline. So if we were to not redo these steps and they were to fail, what does that walk shed look like for residents and commuters? And also proximity to schools, transit stops, and other destinations. So the second poll, you shall have the opportunity, Dave, if you want to launch it, is how many sets of stairs do you think there are in the city of Pittsburgh? You have 4 options. While you're thinking about that, I'll just let you know that there were some really interesting kind of performance curves in also the materials that this step planning project looked at. They looked at 4 basic kind of common materials that are used in steps, going from really specific concrete to wood. And they found that there was 2 different types of costs. There's both the initial installation cost, but also the lifetime cost. So if you're doing concrete, there's a really high installation cost, a really high upfront cost, but those steps could last 75 years. If you're doing wood, it's a really low initial installation cost, but you're constantly having to redo them every 15, 20 years. So the life cycle can actually cost more money. So that was some of the other interesting work that came out of this plan. And it's available online. If you basically just Google Pittsburgh City Steps Plan, you can check this out. Each of the steps have a ranking and a prioritization based on the scoring for those categories that I discussed a little bit ago. So David, do you want to close and let us know what the results were?
Of the 27 people who replied, 11 said D 800 plus, 41%.
That's correct. There's quite a few different assets we have in a lot of different neighborhoods. There's some neighborhoods obviously though that have more steps than others. We've also seen that steps can be a crucial part of placemaking within neighborhoods. We've seen really great mosaic work. Neighborhood welcoming signage placed on steps is another way to kind of activate them. I think there's a South Side step project where they actually go through, or a race where they actually go through multiple steps. I haven't looked that one up yet. I need to get on that race. So now that you have an idea of some of the challenges we're facing with keeping such a large infrastructure going, keeping the trains running on time, as it were, we want to talk about kind of where we are in the process right now, so you understand what your part of this is going to be. In April, the mayor provided priorities, which we're going to get into in just a little bit, for the 2023 capital budget. In May, our team sent out the proposal form. You saw some snippets of it earlier, to the departments and all the council offices so they can start brainstorming ideas. Throughout May and June, we try to focus our efforts on outreach to the public. We're going to do that a few different ways. We'll talk about those towards the end of the slide deck, but these meetings are definitely one of those tools. July 1st is the deadline for when the departments and council offices should have their proposals back to us. Yeah, in September, the Capital Program Facilitation Committee, which is made up of members of the mayor's office, city council budget office, and the controller's office, has the opportunity to submit scores in a summary report of recommendations to the mayor's office for the September budget, the preliminary budget. Between September and October, there's a chance for us to get feedback on the preliminary budget and make some changes for the kind of final budget in November. That's part of the mayor's State of the City address on the second Tuesday of every November. Throughout December, council has the opportunity to bring in different departments and ask them questions about the proposals. They can, and they're all public meetings. They're really actually interesting to watch. I like watching them to see both kind of what the departments are thinking and also what the priorities are of my council person in their line of questioning. They also have the opportunity to make amendments to the budget. They vote on them and they pass by a majority of council. And then they also vote on the amended budget once all the amendments are done, that needs to be passed before the start of our fiscal year, which is January 1st. So in terms of the mayor's priorities, you'll have the opportunity actually to go online, check out our Engage PGH page and read more about each one of these individually. They're in no particular order. Mayor Gainey actually did a great job of kind of couching them in 3 larger ideas that I think make a lot of sense for the needs of the city right now. And again, these are meant to inspire the department directors in their selection of capital projects. They want to be finding things that are going to kind of reinforce what the mayor's vision is as expressed in these priorities through the proposals they submit to our office. So what do those proposal forms look like? We've seen a few snippets already, but it's a pretty straightforward document. The first section is really about the money. We want to understand what the project needs are going to be over the next 6 years. So for 2023, we're going to ask you how much money you need and which kind of flavor of funding you need, and also which phase you're in. And then you have the opportunity to do that for the outer years as well and show us the full life cycle of your project costs. Additionally, we want to make sure we understand what the project is. So we ask for a detailed description of the project and a strong justification. Every council person, every city employee, every department understands that we have a lot of responsibilities and a lot of needs with not a lot of funding. So we want to make sure we're making really informed decisions. So justification is important. It's a great opportunity for the departments to explain how this project fits into the mayor's priorities. And then also we want to understand, even if it's a capital project, what's the operating budget impact going to be on this? So for instance, if we buy a new piece of equipment, do we also need to pay for training for employees to learn how to use that piece of equipment? If we're adding lights to a ball field, what's that going to do to our energy bill? Those are the kind of questions that can be answered in that third section. Also, that capital program facilitation committee that's made up of members of the city council office and the mayor's budget office and the controller's office will actually score the projects based on criteria that are dictated by chapter 218 of city code. So this was the previous set of scoring criteria. We're going to talk a little bit about how we've changed them recently, but they're meant to get at a few different things to make sure that we're covering our bases in terms of meeting federal mandates or state mandates. We want to see projects that leverage outside funding that allow us to turn $1 into $5 or into $10 with federal and state matches. We also want to understand how this project is going to improve the lives of actual neighbors and neighborhoods out in the city. And we want to understand if this is a project that's going to save us money in the long run by allowing us to go down from 3 staff to 2 on a truck or something like that that can help us realize some savings in the operating budget. We also ask for any documented support of the public. So if you've gone to a meeting and expressed support in a CDC meeting or a council meeting for a specific project, that goes a long way in how we score projects. And then also if it's been a part of any kind of adopted plans, we want to make sure that we're following the long-term city planning that the city planning department does whenever we're making capital decisions. This will be our third and final quiz. Dave, if you want to open it. District 1 has, and these are not exact numbers, even though they look exact. I did some cheating when I was looking at our assets earlier today. District 1 has roughly 700,000 linear feet of street. How many linear feet of street do you think there are in District 4? I'll help you out a little bit with the district map. So what we're talking about is District 1 is up here in red, covers a lot of the north side. There's over 700,000 linear feet of street in this red section. But what about down here in this purple section, District 4? What do you think the linear foot is there for theirs? And in terms of paving, I don't know what the number is now. I'm a few years behind, but last I heard it was over $250,000 per mile to redo by 2 minutes paving. Concrete's more expensive. Brick, I don't know about. I assume it's more expensive because it seems more intricate. But I'll defer to the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure people. They're much more up to date on those numbers. But I do want to shout out our paving team. They do an excellent job of both publicizing kind of where they're going to be, and they really squeeze every foot they can out of the budget. They're constantly spending down money in a really efficient way and looking for more money. So whenever we find money we can recycle towards the end of the summer, we try to make sure that they're covered to get in those last few miles. Paving is something that really impacts all of our lives. Even if you don't leave your house a lot or don't drive, you still rely on delivery. You still want your neighbors to be able to drive on safe streets. They're also the bedrock for things like traffic calming. You can't really have traffic calming with a bunch of potholes, although some people consider potholes to be traffic calming. So it's just important to think about how mobility can impact somebody's day-to-day life and how paving can be an expression of just making sure that we're taking care of people. David, do you have any of the results?
10 people answered. 5 of them said A, 640,898 feet.
So these are all kind of, again, semi-real numbers from different districts throughout the city. So District 4, this purple section, has, maybe a fifth, maybe a quarter. It's answer D is the correct answer, of the linear feet of roadway that District 1 does. Even though they look pretty close in terms of total land mass, there's just different needs. Every district has a different set of needs. You'll see this too with District 8 and other districts in terms of pools or senior rec centers, things like that. There's just different needs for different neighborhoods. And so whenever you see something that's equally distributed across all districts, just know that there may be some politics afoot. But we all have unique needs, and that's part of the capital budget process, is understanding what different neighborhoods need. So we were going to talk to Domi in just a little bit. They'll have the opportunity to talk through some of the great work that they're doing out in the world. It's a lot. They've got a lot of staff. They've got a lot of projects. I'm always impressed with how Director Lucas kind of keeps everything together. But first, I do want to take a moment and talk about some quick changes we made to the capital budget process this year. So again, on the left-hand side are the scoring criteria for the capital budget proposals that we're going to review this year. For 2023's capital budget, we just updated code a few months ago now, to do 2 major things. One was to kind of clean up some of the language just to make it more consistent in terms of sentence structure. But the other was to introduce 2 things that I think are really important. One is to add this new criteria, this third one down. Project has a clear plan for execution, including site control, project timeline, procurement strategy, and professional cost estimate. We've just found that over the years, a lot of projects who were not kind of in good shape with the proposal process had a hard time getting in shape as time went on. So we found that one key to success is making sure that the work is being done on the front end, so we fully understand what the real world impact is going to be, how this project is going to play out with an 8-month design period and 16 months of construction. And what does weather look like in December? Can we count those months? No, we shouldn't. That sort of conversation is really important to the success of the project. So we want to start counting for that in our scoring of the projects. And then the last one was just updating language. I think was important to begin with. The originals over here on the left, ability to improve quality of life in all city neighborhoods. We do want to make sure that what we're adding in terms of infrastructure is a bonus. It's creating new opportunities in people's lives. But we amended it to make sure that we are specifically calling out for projects that improve the lives of residents with low and moderate incomes. We are an entitlement community for the community development block grants from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. We'll talk more about those next Wednesday again on June 8th. But it's not really keeping pace with inflation. It's not keeping pace with need. We need to be more aggressive and rely on money in addition to those CDBG dollars to make sure that we're getting our residents with lower and moderate incomes another leg up, a chance to really grow and be a part of Pittsburgh's future. So these are 2 changes that we're really excited about. I'm also excited to hear though from Director Lucas, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And I also want to say I apologize. Normally when we have these meetings in person, we're able to do pierogies and share food and offer childcare and do really fun things, but If you can't tell from my voice already, it was in the cards for a while that this wasn't meant to be live.
And Dave, you did such a great job. I'm super impressed. The whole Domi exec team is online and we're chatting about our answers to your questions. And so we love it. And by the way, for anybody in the audience that got 100% on those answers, please contact me. We are always hiring and we would love to have you on board. So my name is Kim Lucas. I'm the director for the city's Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. Dave did a great job talking a bit about what our department does and the type of projects we do and how we engage with the budget. I'm going to go into just a little bit more detail about the different types of projects we have and a little bit behind our process for how we identify projects for capital budget requests. And then at the end, I am joined right now by some of my team members. Our chief engineer, Eric Setzler, is on the line. Mike Mallock, our acting municipal traffic engineer, who is also our signals engineer, is on the line. Jeff Scallican, my deputy director, and Evan Gross, our fiscal and contracting supervisor, is available. So if you have questions about any specific projects or anything that I mentioned, the team is available to answer some of those questions. And I know that there was a comment earlier about the cost comparison between concrete and asphalt. And at this time, it's at least 10 times as expensive when you compare mile to mile or foot to foot for concrete repairs as it is to do asphalt. So with that, I'm going to quickly go over our department's mission, which is we're here to provide the physical mobility necessary to support the social and economic mobility of the residents for the city of Pittsburgh. You know, as Dave mentioned, even if you don't leave your home, you are consuming the services of the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure. We are the one department where as soon as you physically enter the city of Pittsburgh, you are going to consume our services, whether it's you're using our roadways or you're going through signalized intersections or you're benefiting from streetlights. Or perhaps you're just benefiting from utilities that are running through our right of way that we give permits to and inspect. You are consuming our services. So we are a department that is 100 people strong and has a very, very diverse portfolio. Our goals in support of that mission are number one, safety. We don't want anybody to be seriously injured or killed just trying to get where they need to go in the city of Pittsburgh. Our second goal has to do with accessibility. We want to make sure that all residents, regardless of where they live, have access to fresh fruits and vegetables within 20 minutes travel time of their home. And that means even without access to a private automobile, if you're taking public transit, we want you to be able to meet your basic needs within 20 minutes travel time from home. Our third goal has to do with very short trips. We know that when people are able and choose to take short trips by walking and biking and public transportation instead of by automobile, that they are reducing the congestion on our streets, they're reducing the air quality issues that we have, and they're improving their public health, our public health, their individual health, and probably having a good time. So we want to make sure that we're providing the facilities so that people can safely choose to walk or bike where they need to go. Our fourth goal has to do with affordability. We know that housing costs are rising. We know that energy costs have risen. And we have a goal that the combined costs of energy, housing, and transportation don't exceed 45% of any household's income, regardless of what that income level is. We can only influence the transportation element of that. So what that means is that we want to make sure that we provide access, safe access to affordable modes of transportation, like walking and biking and getting around without your car. And finally, we want our streets to reflect the values and pride of our city. So we pursue these goals through a variety of program types, everything from the physical infrastructure, which I'm going to talk more about tonight, to planning and mobility services and making sure that opportunities are available for people regardless of how they choose to travel our city. And for a city where 20% of our residents don't have access to cars, it's incredibly important that we are considering all residents, especially our most vulnerable residents, and making sure that they are benefiting from our programs. So the first element of our department that I'm going to talk about are operations and our assets. In the quiz that you just took, you heard that we had over 800 sets of public steps. We have 150 city-owned and maintained bridges. We have over 1,000 miles of roadways that we maintain. 600 intersections of those, over 600 of those intersections are signalized, which means we're maintaining advanced signal technology. We have 40,000 streetlights. There are so many elements in the public space that the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure manages that a lot of folks don't realize are within the purview of our department. And those are the types of elements that we proactively plan to keep in a state of good repair. So in our department, we evaluate project ideas based on a number of criteria. That criteria, depending on the type of project or program that we're seeking funding for, might have to do with the condition of the asset. If we're talking about bridges, if we're talking about our roadways, then we take into consideration what condition those assets are in. When we're talking about a planning study, we have other elements that we're using to compare. So for our first asset type, which is bridges and retaining walls, these are obviously very visible and very important elements to our infrastructure. We evaluate where our critical safety upgrades are most needed. We have inspection reports for every single bridge that we own and maintain. And we take that data and we prioritize where the investment is needed. We don't just, because we have limited resources and we have to be strategic, we also take a look at the return on investment, things that will prolong the life of that asset and its use, and whether or not there are redundancies in the route of where that element is. For planning and mobility, we take a look at a lot of community input. We look at where we have received 311 requests. We look at different safety data that we have available to us and mobility data. We're able to access cell phone pings so that we know when and where and how people are traveling in our city. And that can help us identify places where there are a lot of people or where there's a lot of need. We look at things like access to public transportation and where we have major freight corridors. All of these elements identify high need locations where we may need to do additional research and additional planning to identify projects for safety improvement or for operational efficiency. In our complete streets work as well, we're taking a look at trip generators. So not only are we looking at where roads are, how they're being used today, but how roads could be used in the future and where we might have gaps in our sidewalks. So things like schools, access to libraries and religious institutions. All of those sorts of elements get a weight in when we're identifying different mobility connections and what their relative importance is to our network, and also in identifying vulnerable communities that need more investment. For traffic calming, which is one of our most popular programs that started a few years ago, we start with stakeholder input. I believe last year we had received over 700 applications and requests for DOMI to take a look at the traffic safety on a neighborhood street. We have different criteria that we use to evaluate whether or not a street is eligible for a traffic calming project. It has to be, a lower order street, like a residential street, within certain volume criteria, and it has to have speeds that, when we collect the data on the speeds, that demonstrate that there is a speeding problem. We, as I mentioned, received, I think, over 700 applications last year, and we were able to do about a dozen projects. We're working right now to stand up a website with better information on the evaluation criteria and also a map of all the places that we've received these requests, because we know so often we'll receive duplicate requests because people don't realize their neighbors may have already submitted their request. And so we want to make sure that by providing even better information, that our residents have the information they need to make informed decisions. With our traffic safety program, which expands a bit beyond a traffic calming program, we look at locations that may not qualify for our standard traffic calming. They might be busier streets with higher volumes and higher speeds. And we work with the communities and we work with different, sometimes we're working with the local MPO to identify corridors where we can do safety projects. We recently, last year, released our pedestrian safety action plan, which was using data and working with the Federal Highway Administration to identify high need and high risk corridors for more evolved and involved traffic safety programs. So that can include signal upgrades, that can include crosswalks, that can include sidewalk gap filling, or any other tool from our toolkit. And as I just mentioned, signal upgrades are one of the ways that we are improving not only the safety of our streets, but the operational efficiency so that we improve our opportunities to control and to manage our signals remotely. When there's a major event like an emergency or a major event like a ball game, there's sometimes needs to change how our signals are operating. There are things like transit signal priority that will help buses get through signals when they need to, or emergency vehicles. And so when we talk about upgrading signals, it's not always just a one-for-one replacement of red, yellow, green. A lot of times there's a lot of technology behind the scenes that you're not seeing, but that are making our streets safer and to work better. Our Bike Plus plan. So we released our first bike plan in 20 years in 2020. It has over 120 miles of new on-street facilities and additional miles of trail facilities that the city is endeavoring to implement. And so this is just an example of one of our mobility plans that focuses on a specific mobility mode, which was bikes and other slow speed devices that would benefit from things like bike lanes, and did the deep dive on the data to identify where those gaps were in our network, to work with communities to identify where their highest priority connections were needed, and to make sure that we were pursuing and advancing these improvements in the most equitable way possible. Trails, again, one of our most beautiful assets in our city is our miles and miles of beautiful trails. So not necessarily talking about walking trails inside of a park, but these are those trails that you see along the rivers or other off-street facilities that accommodate bicycles and pedestrians and are often considered the most comfortable way for people to get around without their cars. Flood control. So often the projects and the calls that we get with citizens' concerns have to do with water. So even though we are not a water authority, because the water has an impact on our public right-of-way, which we are responsible for, a lot of our projects have to do with water mitigation. We prioritize these projects based on public input and the feasibility and the cost effectiveness. And whenever possible, we coordinate and collaborate with other entities. For example, we do collaborate with PWSA, the Pittsburgh Water and Sewer Authority, in order to cost share on projects. Sometimes they have a project to do flood mitigation and we identify opportunities to build a trail, two cuts or one cut for two projects. And so at every turn, we're coordinating with other entities to make sure that our resources are being spent as effectively and efficiently as possible. STEPS investments. So you heard Dave talk about our STEPS plan that identified and prioritized our steps, over 800 sets of them, based on their importance to the pedestrian network. We are fortunate to have received a decent amount of federal funding recently to do major step rehabilitation projects, and we have more that we are hoping to receive, because we know that these are not only critical connections to our safe network for pedestrians to get around, we know that they're part of the pride of the city. As the former director Ricks used to say, walking is in Pittsburgh's DNA, and part of the reason that it's there are the steps. And street resurfacing. So one of the biggest chunks of our budget, of our capital budget, has to do with the street resurfacing program. As you can see, we identify streets on an annual basis based on their condition. We look at an equitable distribution of the resources by looking at different districts and evaluating how many miles of roadway are within each district, and looking at previous investment and condition scores so that we can balance and make sure that each of our districts is has streets in as great of condition as possible. We again coordinate closely with the utility providers within the city, as they are the #1 entities that have to often dig into our streets in order to perform work, so that we're not resurfacing a street and then having a utility company come in right behind us to tear it up. Now, there are times where there are emergencies where on resurfaced streets, the utility company has a water main break, for example, and then you see the street get torn up again. But to the greatest extent possible, we're preventing that by sharing our list with those companies in advance and having them share their list with us so that we can plan around it. I believe this year we were able to pave just under 50 miles of street, maybe closer to 40. And as you heard earlier, we have over 1,000 miles of roadway that we maintain. So on an annual basis, our paving team does an amazing job stretching that budget. But from a sheer numbers and resources standpoint, we don't have quite what we would like in order to keep all of our miles of roadway in a state of good repair. So slopes and landslide. This is one of those categories where on an annual basis, we request funding for it, but you can't always predict what you're going to need. I believe this year we have about $1 million in emergency mitigation efforts, somewhere between 500 and $1 million in various capital budget buckets. And in one weekend, a few weekends ago, when we had lots of rain, we had over $300,000 worth of cleanup activity alone. So that money is critical, and it's one of the more difficult programs to budget for because it's so dependent literally on the weather. We know where the steep slopes are. We know where there are areas that are high risk, but we don't always know exactly where there are going to be issues. And so we do our best to predict and to do preventative projects whenever possible. But this is one of those buckets that's going to have to keep, we're going to have to keep in our budget, and we have to make hard decisions sometimes about where to spend our limited dollars. And federal and state funded projects. So I believe I mentioned that DOMI is the majority of the city's capital budget. And right now we have around $150 million worth of capital projects that we're managing. We in 2022 have been able to leverage more than a 1-to-1 ratio, so that for every dollar of city money that has gone into our programs, we've received more than $1 of external funding, often from federal and state sources for those projects. For bridges, for example, there's often a 5% local match for those multi-million-dollar projects. And for different types of projects, there are different match percentages that capital budget resource goes towards. There are programs such as CMAQ, which is the Congestion Mitigation Air Quality Program, that we've been able to use in the past to not only fund programs and projects, but also staffing. Our Safe Routes to School coordinator, our very first one that joined the department about 2.5 years ago, was initially funded using transportation alternatives money. And we right now are hiring for a transportation demand management coordinator whose salary for 2 years will be paid by, I believe, CMAQ money. And so we try to use as many federal sources of funding in creative ways as possible so that our projects, we can do as much with what we've got. Finally, I'm going to talk a tiny bit about our plans. So you heard Dave mention that we have to be very, very strategic with the money that we're pursuing and with the projects that we request. We have a number of planning efforts that we've recently published that help us prioritize which projects to pursue. This is a slide of our 2070 vision plan. We published last year our 50-year vision plan that talks about making connections within our city, all the way from the neighborhood to neighborhood scale up to the Pittsburgh to the globe scale, because we know that to thrive as a city and to have and continue to grow and expand and have a strong economic foundation, that we need to have connections, not only within the city, but to other places. And so this plan, I encourage you all to take a look at it, talks about those connections and will be the blueprint for when new modes of transportation come online, where they should be in the city and what sort of support networks need to be built to support them. The Pedestrian Safety Action Plan, I talked a little bit about this earlier. This has identified high priority and high risk areas based on safety data and utilization and things like transit routes, so that we know when we're doing safety studies where the next ones are. We've got a list now and it's in our PSAP. So I encourage you to take a look at that. The Strip District Mobility Plan is an example of a neighborhood plan that DOMI recently wrapped up that engaged with the community, took a look at things like parking demand and supply, bike connections, any other sidewalk and safety concerns that might be there, and laid out a blueprint for where we need to go in the future. And little by little, on an annual basis, our budget requests that we're going to make to the city are going to be based on a lot of these plans, because that's where we were able to work with the community and take our time and evaluate data and come up with strategic recommendations. And another example of a plan that we had funded by the Allegheny County Active Transportation Program is the Homewood Mobility Plan. we were able to catalog data and collect data for every single sidewalk within the Homewood community so that we know exactly where the gaps are. We know exactly where we need to make investment. My hope is that that amount of data and that type of data is something that bit by bit we'll be able to have for the whole city so that we can begin to fill in those gaps to make safer connections for all of our residents. And with that, I'm happy and my team is happy to take any questions that you might have.
So the first question was, will today's session be recorded and shared? Yes, there's a few ways it gets shared. The first one that I use most often is the city's YouTube channel. It's on just the main YouTube site. You can always search for City Channel Pittsburgh. Also, they do some replays, unpredictable times on the cable channels themselves. I've gotten those, woken up to those text messages from 3 a.m. of you're on my TV. I'm not sure why. So I know they do them both ways, but I usually use the YouTube channel as my first resource. John asked a great question. Where does maintenance fit into the question, fit into the equation? Patrick Cornell is in charge of the operating budget. So Pat's on the panel tonight as well. They're going to have an operating budget meeting coming up pretty soon. So be sure to stick around for that. We're going to talk about the Engage page where you can find out more information about the operating budget meeting as well. So stick around for that one. It'll be after,
Can I also add to that real quick, Dave, that a number of the projects that DOMI undertakes are rehabilitation of these assets and major repairs. So typical maintenance like washing our bridges may not qualify for capital funding, but a lot of the work that we do on those major assets could be considered maintenance type activities, but because of the scope of those projects and the dollar figure and the prolonging of those assets for more than 5 years, they count within the capital expenditures.
I thought of DOMI last night when I was running under the 40th Street Bridge and I saw some scuppers, which I don't know if I'm getting the nomenclature right, but I understand them to be kind of the way water gets, pumped out of a bridge surface down to the ground. They're like tubes that come out of the bottom. Maybe the downspout's got a different name, but every time I run by a scupper, I think of DOMI. Because maintenance is really important. Like Kim said, it can increase the useful life of an asset and pennies on the dollar compared to waiting for things to get really bad and then having to do a capital project probably sooner than you'd like to. Hey, Don Jackson, good to see you again. Steps on the East End, Patrick gave a great resource for that. If you want to see any of the steps within the city, there's a website, pittsburghpa.gov/city steps, that has all of the steps in our envelope. You can check out the assessment in terms of that scoring criteria that we talked about earlier, and see a bunch of different connections in your neighborhood you may not know about. Brian, thanks for calling out that acronym. So Brian asked, what does CPFC stand for? It stands for Capital Program Facilitation Committee. And that's the group that's made up again of the Mayor's Office of Management and Budget. There's 2 members from that. There's 2 members from City Council's Budget Office. And then there's a 5th member from the Controller's Office. And the 5 of us get together and review and score all the capital budget proposals for the next year. We make formal recommendations to the mayor in terms of what to include in the budget. The mayor, of course, can follow those recommendations as much as they want. We try to publish the recommendations in the back of the budget, though, just for some added transparency. If anybody was wondering how projects scored, you can always check out the back of like the 2022 capital budget has it as an appendix. You can see all the projects that were submitted and how they scored. Brian also asked about the source that I was referencing earlier that inspired the Capital Program Facilitation Committee criteria. It is called Chapter 218. Brendan gave a great note on that. The best way to do it is the way we do it, which is using the public tool. We go to municode.com. You can search for, actually, I usually just Google Municode Pittsburgh and it takes me right to the Pittsburgh specific site. And then in there, I just type in 218 and it gets me to the chapter that's really relevant to my job. It dictates a lot of what we do. So yeah, that was Chapter 218, which you can find on Pittsburgh's Municode website. Brian also asked about the process of updating the capital program facilitation criteria, who oversaw the amendments and what was the process for updating it. So in terms of who oversaw it, it came out of our office, the Office of Management and Budget. It were things that we've noticed over the years. So I actually joined the city coming up on almost exactly 7 years. And I think next week or the week after, it'll be 7 years on the nose. My first day with the city was coming to one of these meetings actually to see how public feedback worked. for capital program. We've had some really great successes from the changes that were first established in Chapter 218 back in 2014, 2015. There were some council members who used Chapter 218 to help get us out of some financial distress we were under with the state. It became a great kind of North Star for us to follow in terms of developing the capital budget. But after being here for 7 years, we just kind of realized that there are some tweaks we wanted to make to it. So we talked to the mayor's office, we talked to council budget office, we talked to the finance chair of council who we communicate with on legislation and workshop some ideas, came to a consensus on language, and then we put it forward as an ordinance. I don't get to write those often, I usually write resolutions, but changes to a code are an ordinance. So we wrote an ordinance to change city code. And there were opportunities for public comment, and council members had the opportunity to ask us questions like they would any other piece of legislation, and it passed a few weeks ago. So you can always find that on the Legistar website for the city council. That's where I look up all the legislation too. Kim, you probably know this one better than I do. The question was, what is an MPO? I feel like I've heard of that in some county meetings, but you can answer better than I can.
Yeah, so an MPO, sorry for dropping some lingo there, is a metropolitan planning organization. So ours is a Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission, also known as SPC. So that might be an acronym that people are more familiar with. And they do a lot. They help dole out funding, federal funding, but they also they undertake some of their own planning studies and safety projects as well. So they really convene the region, of which city of Pittsburgh is one member, and look at the bigger picture of how different elements can impact people outside of these municipal boundaries.
Yeah, the Southwestern Pennsylvania Commission meetings are really interesting. At least to me, they're fun. You get to see there's 11 counties with wildly different needs. I mean, Greene County compared to Pittsburgh is it's a different flavor altogether. So it's really interesting to see how infrastructure is prioritized in different places, and just kind of culturally how people interact with infrastructure differently to the different counties. Deborah Knox asked an interesting question too, Kim, you might be better to answer. The new traffic circles can be difficult to maneuver for blind, visually impaired, or wheelchair walker users. Have you addressed this?
So when we were undertaking the traffic circles the mini traffic circles as part of our traffic calming program and our Move Forward program, we engaged with the City County Task Force on Disabilities. And one of the changes that two of the elements that we implemented to specifically help address this concern was improving the crosswalks at these traffic circles and making sure that they were high visibility and that the traction of the material, the thermoplastic that was used was high so that there wasn't a slipping issue. And we also, even though it might be something that we modify in the future because it's not according to standard convention, but we left the stop signs in place at these intersections. Typically with traffic circles, the circle itself is what manages the sort of movement through the intersection. But as a concession to the communities and to help transition communities into how to use traffic circles, because these were the first mini circles that Pittsburgh had ever done, we left stop signs in place.
Yeah, I think my first traffic circle interaction was in Seattle. It's nice to see them kind of move over this way too.
That's definitely the city that we look to for their experience and their guidance and the safety improvements that they offered.
Yeah, a lot of nice flowers in theirs too. So Angela asked, since my street can't have traffic calming because it's an emergency route, can it be considered for traffic safety?
So we actually do have traffic calming projects on, depending on what emergency route we're talking about, we do have traffic calming projects on streets that emergency vehicles use as part of accessing calls and things of that nature. We this year are going to utilize speed. Are we at speed cushions now, Mike? We've gone through the evolution from speed bump through humps through cushions to tables. And that is because we've been working and engaging with our emergency service professionals and learning from them what works best for their vehicles. Mike, I see you're there. If you wanted to add anything about that, Mike is our acting municipal traffic engineer.
Yeah, we are quickly diversifying our traffic calming suite of techniques. Traffic cushions allow emergency vehicles to traverse through two grooves in the speed humps that are sets for like a wider X, like a vehicle that has a wheel spacing that wouldn't be a passenger vehicle. We're also looking to raise crosswalks, as in putting a pedestrian crossing facility on top of a raised feature, so that way you have calming at the same location where you're trying to cross pedestrians. A lot of exciting stuff happening.
Excellent. Just to be respectful, I do want to get to some of the three raised hands I know have been raised for a bit long. So 8329, your number ending, would you like to come off mute and ask your question?
Hi, this is Ziggy Edwards. I have two questions, actually. One is the more involved one, so I'll just get to that first. My question is about the budget for the Oakland connector. So, I mean, I guess I don't need to get into the background of it. The project, Mayor Gainey announced that, you know, his administration is stopping the build out of it. It was a project that residents of the affected communities really didn't want. So we're happy that that's not happening. There is still work happening that is along a similar route. My question, well, I have a couple of questions about this. How can I find out where the funds, like how much, because there is still an Oakland connector budget from what I understand. Maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I understand, there's not a budget for 2023 and on, but there are funds in there from 2018 and 2019. And I've been having a very difficult time tracking down exactly how much is in there and what's being, I know there are funds being moved out of there, but exactly what funds are being moved out and to where. So that's one part of the question on that. And because it's not in future budget years in this window you were discussing, when will it be removed from that 50-year plan that you mentioned? Because it is in there, and from what I understand, it's still in there. So I wanted to know when it will be removed from that. And I have another question. I don't know if you want to take that one first, or if I should just go ahead and finish asking my question.
Yeah, do you want to ask your second one? We might be able to combine some answers.
Okay, yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Oh, and I forgot to mention about the Oakland connector. Knowing that exactly what you were mentioning earlier about the huge number of landslides and the limited funds and really having to prioritize, it's just one of those things that makes us like residents in the affected community, because there's not just one, but two areas on the route of that Oakland connector where there's a long history of landslides. And so knowing that those are a big issue and that they would take a lot of funds to repair, just wondering about how the finances of that will be adjusted, since there isn't going to be a road for shuttles going through there, and why do the work, since it's so expensive and there are existing streets that have these issues. And then the next question is actually about the city steps. I'm interested, I guess a lot of people in Pittsburgh are interested in the city steps. I have a set right up the street from my house that I use all the time. I use them today. And that map that you were talking about is very helpful. Thanks. I didn't know about that. I will check it out. But so my question is about that particular set of steps, because I use it every day, and there's one step on that set of city steps that is completely deteriorated. They're concrete steps. You can see the rebar, and it's like decaying. And there was one time that was very scary when I almost I made a wrong step. I knew it was there, but I still just made a wrong step, and I almost fell down the whole set of steps backwards. I was pushing my bike up the bike runnel. Pretty scary. I mean, I'm extra careful now. I still do use it. I did call 311 And so my question is, like, in terms of that map of the city steps, is there a way to, I don't know if it's connected with that map specifically, but is there a way to sort of track the amount of, I don't know, attention that's being paid to those steps, like tracking the number of 311 calls? I mean, not just for you guys, but for like somebody like me who's just, you know, who made the call and is wondering like where it goes from there. How much of a priority do my neighbors consider it? You know, that kind of thing. So I can know, like, have some idea of how high of a priority it is and when these steps might get fixed. So that was my other question. Thank you.
Yeah, those are good questions. I'm going to pause on the steps question just because we got good questions too from Alyssa and Laura. And I think there's a great opportunity for either Director Lucas or Eric to talk about how step projects are prioritized in a little bit. But I do want to get to the Mount Oakland connector / 4 mile run projects. That's really important as well. So I'll pass to Director Lucas on the current scope of the project as it stands now. My understanding was that the autonomous vehicle part's been stripped away, but there were still, to your point, some really crucial upgrades that needed to happen in terms of the trail, but also the landslide mitigation and some flood control work. I know we're partnering with PWSA. They're doing some of that work themselves, and we're working with them on some other portions of the project. I'll defer to the smarter people on the call for the details for that. But in terms of budget, it would get amended the way anything else in a prior year budget would get amended, which is just through legislation. So usually in the capital budget, we have on each of the pages, I'm gonna try to share my screen, a number on the bottom left that Brendan Gatiki on our team works really hard to get right every time we publish the budget, that shows you what the outstanding balances are from prior years. Share. Okay, so if you're looking at capital budget, like for example, this is 28th Street Bridge. The bottom of this first page usually has a number of prior year funds that are unencumbered, unexpended. So in terms of changing the project budget, we have seen a lot of push from Council District 5, Councilmember O'Connor, to get that money repurposed towards things that are of higher and better use for the residents. So that's in progress. I'd have to go back and look. I'm not sure exactly what the balance is for prior year funds, but it's something that we check in with the departments on as part of the budget process too. If they have old funds, we'd rather them spend down old funds to do things like landslide mitigation or flood control than give them new money. So that's part of the kind of process from our end. It's just really just legislation to move the money from one project to another. But I don't know if Director Lucas or somebody else from DOMI wants to speak to the project scope as it is now.
Yeah, Dave, you had it exactly right. So the connection that has always been a part of that project, which needs a new name, which is actually a series of smaller connection pieces. We're still pursuing a connection, but what we're not doing is building a road that is being designed to hold motor vehicles. Instead, we have reduced the project and the connection down to something that is equivalent to our other trails, our bike and pedestrian trails. And so that is what is being constructed. And so the local funding, as Dave mentioned, that's still within the project, is to collaborate with PWSA on the flood mitigation work and the trail connection. And with regards to the landslide mitigation, Sylvan Avenue, which is one of those pieces, was closed years ago because of landslide activity. And so reopening it as a multimodal trail for bikes and pedestrians is a more cost-effective way, instead of building a full-fledged road through there, to improve access and reopen a connection that the city once had, but doing it in a way that is sensitive to the concerns from the community and also cost effective.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we'll get back to the steps in just a little bit, but I want to give Catherine and Dina a chance. So Catherine, do you want to come off mute and ask your question?
Sure. Hi, thanks so much. And thanks so much for having this webinar. It's been really great. I have kind of a two-part question about the logistics of how we're supposed to, either residents or neighborhood organizations, how we're supposed to go about submitting our capital requests or ideas. So do you mind a two-part question?
Go for it.
Cool. So the first part is just if you could provide some clarity around how we should be submitting our ideas or suggestions or requests, because I know that there is an open online map where anybody can drop suggestions. So I'm not sure if we should only be using that method or if we should still be, drafting letters and sharing them with our council people. What do you recommend?
I would do both, honestly. Your elected officials are there to represent you, so never feel bad about asking for their help, advocating for something that you need in your community. But also the surveys do help. We have, you're stealing my thunder, I had some stuff to show in a little bit about how we take the survey data, we tag it for the right department and the right council office, and then we send it to them so they have the opportunity to filter this big long list of all these specific project ideas into things that are just germane for their team. Then they can submit proposals to us. We actually usually open the window a little bit past July 1st so that the departments and the council offices have a chance to actually react to your input in real time. So we know that these meetings are going to wrap up on June 9th. It's going to take me probably a week or two to scrub the data and get everything tagged. So we usually give them a couple of weeks to respond to any of the survey responses. So again, I think both channels are smart. You can put it through the survey. If it doesn't become an idea now, at least it's documented with public support. It doesn't become a proposal now, at least it's documented with public support for the future, but never feel bad about reaching out to your council person to ask them to put in a proposal.
For next year's presentation, I'll have sort of a screenshot of one of our sample rubrics that we do. But when we receive requests from external parties, sometimes community organizations will send us their project requests. Sometimes council members want to collaborate with the department to make sure we're aligned in what the right highest priority projects are. We will add them to our matrix and we evaluate them for things like, as I mentioned before, for assets, we look at their condition index. So whatever data we have about the condition it's in, we look at that. If they're safety projects, then we look at whatever crash data we have to find out if there is a documented issue there. Even though we know that there are a lot of places that don't have high crashes because people avoid them. And that's also something that we're sensitive to. We have an equity index as well, where we have a static map that we've developed that looks at not only demographic information, but looks at things like access to automobiles and access to public transportation to add a geographic component to our evaluation. And we look at where previous investment has been. And so with our, I talked a little bit about this with our street resurfacing and looking at a district scale, what the condition of the roads are and the miles of roads per capita and that sort of thing. And that's one of the ways that we take a look at where previous investment has been so that we can make sure that we have an equitable strategy in place to help prioritize our projects.
Thank you. So I live in Greenfield and I know a lot of folks in Greenfield, and then also in Squirrel Hill, there's two major intersections that our neighborhoods share that are pretty problematic. One is, if you're familiar with the area, sort of Beechwood and Forward, Beechwood Forward Monitor, that section. And the other one is Browns Hill Road, where Browns Hill Road meets Hazelwood and Beechwood over there. And my understanding to date is that those are really difficult areas for the city to work on because they're co-owned between the city and the state. And my question is, for those areas that we already know are co-owned infrastructure, should we as residents should we even bother including those with our requests? Is that worth it for you to hear? Or is it not something that you can do anything about since it's like a joint ownership situation?
I think it's worthwhile to share with us. There are different requirements when there are streets that are state streets, for example, Carson Street or many more that PennDOT is responsible for, and PennDOT has rules about what sorts of elements you can put on their streets. To date, they don't allow us to do things like speed humps or bumps on their roads. And so that's why if we get a project request, anything that we would want to propose, we'd have to do with the state. So yes, I would say still send them. It's good for us to have them as part of our awareness. And as Dave was saying earlier, you can send the same request to elected representatives that would be relevant for state decision making as well.
Thank you.
Good questions. Thank you, Catherine. Dina, did you want to pose your question? Maybe not.
Oh, actually, real quick, Dave, I was just reminded by my Deputy Director, Jeff Scallican, that we're incorporated into PennDOT's project with Beechwood and looking at the Squirrel Hill interchange. So I believe that is one that is right now in their site that they're looking to make some major improvements to, and we're working with them on that.
Nice. Dina, if you come back, feel free to pipe up. I'm going to go back to some of the written questions though in the meantime. And then to our earlier question about steps, and also to Alyssa's question about bids started on concrete steps, Laura's question, where can residents find a list of which flights of city steps are being repaired, scheduled to be repaired every year? Domi, I don't know if you want to talk about steps prioritization and kind of what's in the hopper for newer step projects.
Yeah, so I know there were a couple different elements to the questions in there about steps. So when we did the steps plan a few years ago that took a look at prioritizing based on relevance to the network, that generated a list from highest sort of demand to lowest demand. And that also had follow-up work for that was internal facing that identified where over the next 5 years we needed to invest because they were steps that were high demand. And then we were able to go out and take a look at their condition as well. And so we do have a list, a ranked list of the highest priority locations for repairs. Now, unlike most of our other assets, steps, because we're pretty unique as a city in terms of the number of public staircases that we have, there aren't the same sort of inspection protocol associated with them as an asset type like you would find for something like a bridge or a roadway. And so we're, as the city of Pittsburgh, developing more metrics to make sure that we have a routine look at these different pieces of infrastructure. I think that's a great suggestion to make public facing where we've received funding beyond the budget itself. The budget book can tell you which, if there's named deliverables within there from the local money, that will be in there. But having a map, maybe updating our steps page where we've got a map that you can click on every single set of steps in the city and you can find out where it ranks with regards to its priority in the network. We may be able to add some information there too about ones that have capital money that's already been dedicated to it. Because we know that they are so important to our city, and they're one of the few assets that different organizations come to us and say, we want to volunteer, we love the steps, how can we help you, Domi? So we definitely, that's a great idea about getting more information out there on them. Oh, and I remember somebody, I think Ziggy, you were mentioning that there's a set of steps that has like a single rung that's missing. For minor repairs like that, the Department of Public Works is able to maintain. So if the repair or maintenance that's needed doesn't rise to the level of sort of a capital rehab project, then we work with the Department of Public Works on those minor repairs.
Okay, I'm gonna go out of order because that's too good of a transition to pass up. So Andrew asked, can you talk a little bit about when the restore repair efforts become large enough to qualify as capital projects? It seems in particular, a lot of the bike and pedestrian infrastructure in town is in a state of disrepair. There seems to be no real effort to restore these to their prior condition in normal day-to-day operations. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that kind of dividing line between operating and capital? I know it's purely price, but I know there are certain tipping points we get into in terms of condition of an asset where it's cheaper just to replace the whole thing.
So I think a good example, and again, this is the division between departments, has to do with potholes versus major roadway reconstruction. So if it's a small, imperfection in a roadway surface, which our bike lanes are really just parts of our roadway. And so if we're talking about their condition, a lot of times it's the same sort of analysis. Then the Department of Public Works can go out and evaluate whether it's something that they're able to fill. If it's something that they deem as outside of what they're able to do, because of equipment that they might have available or materials that they have available, then that's when it gets added to our list for evaluation. As I mentioned earlier, I think this year we're able to do something like 3% of our city streets. So, over 1,000 miles of roadway, and we've got the budget to do about 40 something miles. So we know that there are a lot of needs out there. And that's why it's so important, not only with the information we have to determine what the need is, what is the condition, what are the imperfections, but also to then prioritize those needs based on other elements. As I mentioned before, equity, is it located in a high need community? Is it a really critical part of our transportation network? Is it a place that we can leverage other projects and work with utility companies to have that money go even farther? And so we take a look at all of those robust elements to try to make as strategic of a decision as possible when it comes to where we make those investments.
That's a good point. I think with what makes paving and steps so hard for me is that I know the size of the need is knowable. We know what the size of our network of streets are. We can estimate how much of that's bituminous. We can kind of guess how much, very educated estimate, how much it's going to cost per mile. We know the dollar amount we need every year. We know that we're below that, even though the past few years we've had kind of record budgets for paving. It's still just not enough to keep up with the day-to-day, let alone the backlog. Same with city steps. We have 800 plus sets of city stairs. If they last 75, 80 years, we still need to be doing about 10 sets of stairs a year. That's a really tall order. Even if we had all the cash for that, we would need more operating funds for more staff for DOMI to project manage that many sets of stairs. So it's tough because they're such crucial assets that everybody uses in one way or another. But we know fundamentally we just don't collect enough money. And then buttressed up against the needs that we're talking about in this meeting are affordable housing, park spaces. Like there's a lot of other things that happen in the capital budget that make these kind of conversations difficult. But we're hoping with these kind of meetings and with some tools we'll go through at the end of the meeting that you have a better sense of how that prioritization happens at a macro level for all the different asset types in the capital budget.
I just want to add real quick while you're figuring out the next question. We're hoping this year to also have an updated record of all of our street conditions. So Cyclomedia is the company that the city contracts with to do really high resolution imagery of all of our public streets. And we're working with them to try to extract data on the asset condition. And why that's important is the last time that we had a comprehensive look at every single mile of roadway was a number of years ago. And so we've been depreciating and degrading the condition scores based on, formulas, but this will be a good refresh of exactly where we are and what we are. And it will also be a good opportunity to perhaps follow up if we know someone was a permit holder and they opened up our street, and this is a good time to find out if they restored it properly, because we've got 9 inspectors for the whole city. Last year, they performed 50,000 inspections. So 9 people did 50,000 inspections, and that's not nearly enough. We issued 18,000 permits, and so that's not even three looks per permit. And so by using these sort of automated ways of capturing data and better information, we can be really efficient with our people power and be strategic when even making some of these decisions without having to send people out to lay eyes on every mile of roadway.
That's a good point. So there's an anonymous question. Is there a map of city with state versus city owned? I assume that's for things like roadways and bridges. I don't know if that's publicly available, Director Lucas.
That's a great question. So I know that for things like bridges, you can go to PennDOT, you can Google PennDOT, which is the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation, and you can find their bridge website where they will show you all of the bridges, and you'll also be able to find out summary data on the condition of those bridges. For the city GIS network, we're trying to get as much information on there as possible. So I would think that we have information about local roadways versus not, but it's something we can look into. My hope is to oh, yeah.
Yeah, sorry, I let you go too long. If you Google search for PennDOT type 10 map, it'll provide you with a PDF that gives you local versus state. I should have jumped in there faster. Sorry.
That's okay. Thanks, Mike. That's why we have a municipal traffic engineer, someone who can keep eyes on those roads.
Feel free to put that in the chat, Mike. I'd like to put that in my favorites too. Been using Cartograph, which is a little clunky. Thank you. Yeah. So PennDOT Type 10, you said, what's the map with the PDF?
Yep, and they have a GIS portal that I'll link as well that sometimes can be more user-friendly, sometimes it's less user-friendly. I'll put both in the chat.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Dina asked, what community outreach do you do as far as updating residents on the project, work days, closures, and etc.? So Dr. Lucas, I don't know if you want to talk about any specific projects in terms of communication. I'll just say I've enjoyed using Engage PGH as kind of a project specific portal where you can get updates, you can get contact information, timeline, all kinds of great stuff in there, which we'll go through for the budgeting side. But I don't know, Domi wise, if you've had successes recently with community outreach you want to highlight.
Sure, that's another really great question. So we use a variety of different methods depending on the project. The Department of City Planning published a couple years ago a public engagement guide that sort of gives us a roadmap for exactly what type of engagement we should do for the level of impact that our project work might have. And so we do utilize Engage PGH when we're seeking feedback on different projects, whether it's a design project or a planning process. We absolutely use that platform, and it's the best place to look for those opportunities. We use things like press releases and media alerts when there are things that are major closures or full road closures. We we're ramping up our social media utilization to also kind of highlight not only the issues in our network, but also the successes, to let people know we've completed a project or we've had this great win. For things like paving, we do a lot of tactical stuff. We do windshield flyers, we do door hangers, we do posted signs on the street. And so really, depending on the program and depending on the project, we do different tools from within our toolkit.
That's a good point. So Pete McDevitt, formerly of Office of Management and Budget, asked, how does landslide remediation funding differentiate from park reconstruction funding? Have Yin's guys seen Riverview Park lately? So Director Lucas, are you going to talk about landslides and the public right of way? I'll say we do try to consider stormwater management, especially in more and more park projects as time goes on. We recognize that that's some of our best option, our best ammunition against just the terrible flooding we've seen, is being able to put infrastructure into parks. But yeah, Director Lucas, if you want to talk about kind of right of way and how landslides impact the parks.
Yeah, I'm loving these questions tonight. So yeah, landslides can happen in a variety of places, and depending on where they happen, a different department may be involved. For example, if it's impacting private property and structures, then permits, licenses and inspections will be involved. If it's impacting a park, the Department of Public Works will be involved. And when it's impacting a right of way or a road, DOMI is involved. So in Riverview Park, I believe there are 11 landslides right now and varying projects for each of those. So we are the technical experts for the city and the engineers that are working on those projects and managing those projects. And Eric, if you're available and you want to touch a little bit on the update for those, please chime in. So we do manage them in the park. I hope and think that there could be opportunity for things, other sources of funding, like maybe RAD funding to help support that work within a park. And certainly, our staff time's coming out of our department staff. And so it's definitely a blend of funding. And I see that Eric has unmuted. So anything you'd like to add, Eric?
I have. Yeah. No, you're right. We are, maybe it's a dubious distinction to be the technical experts on landslides, but so we are. We've been working pretty closely with DPW on Riverview Park. You're correct, there's about 11 landslides there, at varying degrees of severity. We have one project, if you've been through there, that is under construction. It's been a little slow developing, but that one is getting fixed. We have a couple others in design, and we are working with DPW to scope out our next projects to put into design. We have been fortunate on that RAD, the Regional Asset District, has been able to allocate some capital money to put towards landslides in that park. And also, as you mentioned on water, dealing with the water is always a key for any landslide. So that's part of our scope for our engineers on these design projects, is to figure out where the water is coming from and where we need to get it to in a safe manner.
Always a concern in Pittsburgh is where's the water coming from and where's it going? So Brad asked an interesting question about steps. Many years ago, the Southside Slopes Neighborhood Association and the SSLDC commissioned a study on steps that has helped guide investment decisions over the years. In addition to capital budget dollars, are there any efforts in grant seeking to help with the infrastructure? I feel like we did go, I remember working with former Director Gable on a set of stairs. I thought it was on the south side that had actual mosaic up the side of it. And I remember it being a lot more expensive than we initially thought, because we weren't costing the whole thing initially. And I don't remember which grant we used for that, but I know we have used grant funds in the past for those kind of projects. I don't know if the steps themselves are usually considered for like trail programs. I want to say that they're not, but I don't know if anybody in Domi, Jeff, or Director Lucas, if you want to talk about any of the other kind of grant opportunities where steps might be applicable. I'm trying to think through in my head, like SMART and other things that are available, but nothing's ringing a bell that's specific to steps.
Yeah, I think, and Evan or Jeff, if you guys want to chime in, or Eric, I think there's no shortage of opportunities because steps are part of our pedestrian network. And so anytime I think that we can be pursuing funding for those sorts of connections, then steps can be eligible. And certainly there are things that we've pursued earmarks for, we've received ARP money, federal money for. And so anytime that there's an opportunity out there, we definitely pursue it. I see Eric turned his camera on. I don't know if you have something you wanted to add, Eric.
Yeah, no, just to second the fact that we're always looking for sources of money, to, as you were mentioning earlier in the presentation, to leverage our dollars. One thing that since steps are such a unique asset type, we do have to be a little selective about which funding sources we try to put towards them. We did a project several years ago for the John Kerr steps in Oakland, which was very successful at the end of the day. But the funding source being administered through PennDOT did cause the project to cost more than it may have otherwise. So still a very successful project. But that's where just looking at the source of money and how it's tailored to the project that we're trying to do, and trying to find a good match between those is something we really want to take a close look at.
Yeah, that's important. A lot of grantors are kind of looking for really innovative new things. And sometimes we're trying to get needs met with just core infrastructure. So it's finding a way to kind of tell that story about the key part of this neighborhood that these steps represent, and the connections they make that Director Lucas was talking about, and why they're so critical to the community. The good news on that front is we do have a team within the Office of Management and Budget that works exclusively on grant opportunities. It's currently a 3-person team. So when they see notices from the federal government or from PennDOT or from the county for transportation grants, and they see steps are in there, they can reach out to Domi and talk through opportunities in terms of what projects do you have in your hopper that might line up with this, which ones have you already costed, which ones can we write a compelling narrative for, and then kind of pursue the grant together as a team. We've had some really good success. They're pretty good at writing those grants. So there was a 311 question I'm not entirely sure how to answer. Unfortunately, we don't have 311 on the line tonight, but the question is, are there any plans for 311 to become more transparent? Over the years, I've submitted many requests that have been closed with no comment, status update, or information from the city. Can the city share progress or reason for closing requests? Perhaps Domi provide that info for infrastructure related to 311 requests. So I'll ask anybody from Domi who wants to jump in, just kind of what the process is for you in terms of closing out 311 requests. I will say from my perspective, as somebody who works on the capital budget, it's kind of the first line of defense in a lot of cases. We can start to see future capital projects trickle in as 311 requests, which is really important. Also, they're at the end of the day human beings themselves. So I know they've had some issues with illness recently. You can't tell I have too. So I'm a little sympathetic to that right now. Where they've changed their hours a little bit to go from 7 to 7 to 8 to 6. But I do understand the concerns you have around transparency and what happens to my request after it's been closed. So I don't know if there's anybody on the Domi side who wants to just speak to how that process works.
Yeah, so actually, I'm really glad that this question was raised because I see 311 as a really great opportunity for the department, not only to increase its customer service, but also for us to get better information to make our decisions with. So the Department of Mobility and Infrastructure currently has 61 different service request types that are assigned to our department, which means this out of all the categories that people contact 311 for, 61 of those go to our department for handling. We are doing a 311 strategic project right now where we are evaluating all of those request types. We're working with the staff that are responsible for responding to those request types so that we can do a couple of things. We want to make sure that we have consistent and reliable responses so that if you reach out, analogy I used the other day was you go to McDonald's because the hamburger, the Big Mac is going to taste the same every time you go. It's going to be made the exact same way every time you go. And that's the type of experience that I want all residents to have when they call 311 with a DOMI request type. If you call about a steps issue, you're going to get a consistent and reliable response based on that type of issue. So we're working with staff to generate templated responses and protocol for timeliness of responses so that that experience can be as consistent as possible. We also recognize that 311 is not used equitably throughout the city. I've pulled the DOMI data and there are communities that have over 500 outstanding tickets right now, or tickets rather. And there's other communities that have had 0 tickets because 0 calls have been made. And so we're using that absence of public engagement on that platform as an opportunity to proactively reach out to those communities and share information about what 311 is and how it can be used so that they feel comfortable using it and that we can sort of balance out how 311 communicates with us. And one more element of this 311 strategic project that we're doing right now is to also better equip 311 operators with information. We're working with them to find out what are the #1 questions you get about DOMI projects? What are the #1 questions that you get that you don't have the answer to, that if we gave you good information, you wouldn't even have to open a ticket because you could answer the caller's question, thereby providing better customer service for the caller and thereby also preserving DOMI staff from having to answer a ticket because the need was already met. And so we're working in all those ways to improve the experience and to also have better outcomes from that data right now.
Yeah, that's a good point. Mark had an interesting question. What changes are planned in the Strip District plan? I think it is one of the best opportunities for biking pedestrian improvements in the city. So I don't know if there's anybody from DOMI who's well versed in the Strip District plan. I can say I second this. I live in Lawrenceville and commute to downtown, so I use the Strip District constantly. It's such a crucial connector to a lot of neighborhoods from the East End to downtown.
You're right, it is a crucial connection, and the plan identified a need for a better connection between downtown and Lawrenceville via the Strip. So as perhaps the person who asked the question knows, we have a protected bike lane on Penn Ave that starts in downtown, actually goes all the way to the Point and connects you to 15th Street in the Strip District. And then from there, you've got a series of alleys that are recommended that people ride in as part of Smallman Street reconstruction project that Eric's team led. We have added bike lanes, but the connection doesn't get you as close to Lawrenceville as we would like to see. So the plan definitely recommends an improved connection. And right now we're evaluating where that connection should be and exactly what it should be, and working with the community and with designers actively right now to figure that out because we know that it's so critical.
Thank you. Marimba, I don't know if you want to come off mute and pose your question.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for the session. I wanted to talk a little bit about investments in neighborhoods like the Hill District, where so much of the land is publicly owned, and therefore the private owner, so to speak, in those cases would not be responsible for upkeep of sidewalks because the owner is actually the city or a public agency, URA, which means we have an inordinate amount of damage, sidewalks, and or curbs, meaning that we would also need a disproportionate amount of investment because so much of that land is publicly owned. So I wanted to bring that up as a point of consideration so that the city can work in partnership with the public agencies that have ownership so that there can be a strategic plan around investment into our sidewalks and curbs. I do want to address the curb cuts for accessibility in particular. I often see, I work on Center Avenue in the Hill District, and I often see and I live in the Hill District, and I often see on my way to work and back to my home and throughout the neighborhood, senior citizens on wheelchairs in wheelchairs in the street. And it's extremely dangerous, and I'm fearful that someone will get hurt. But I know that the reason why they're in the street 9 times out of 10 is because there's not a proper curb cut at the end of a sidewalk, and so they just opt to stay in the street because they can't get up on the side. I want to bring that up as an urgent matter of concern. I do want to lift up the need for investment in city steps, particularly in communities that do not have a lot of vehicular access for the residents, low and moderate income, particularly low income persons may not have personal transportation. And so mobility, public transportation, and access to public walkways is particularly important for these populations. And so I do, again, want to kind of lift up those folks who are oftentimes not able to they don't have choices, right? And so I want to make sure that we are considering that as we allocate funding. I want to make sure that we highlight that infrastructure dollars should, I believe, go to neighborhood-based projects when possible. What we're seeing oftentimes is that large-scale projects oftentimes that don't assure equitable outcomes for communities and/or the city, oftentimes get a disproportionate amount of public dollars for infrastructure. I'll use the Lower Hill District as an example. If you drive on the Lower Hill District, you'll see beautiful sidewalks, curb cuts, sewer wells, trees planted. But if you come up just a couple of blocks, you'll see exactly what I just described. And so I want to make sure that we shift our attention to those communities most in need and not subsidize as greatly private developers need for public infrastructure. Although I'm not completely against it, I just think that it's so terribly inequitable right now that it's problematic. I want to just encourage the pursuing federal dollars for communities and for the infrastructure needs of communities. So I just want to lift that up. I know there was conversation, so I won't go further into that. A couple of new ideas that I think would be very helpful in stimulating development in communities like the Hill District is utilizing infrastructure to do some of the pre-development on sites that cannot attract private capital in particular. So for example, again, because so much of the land in neighborhoods like the Hill District are vacant lots that are publicly owned, one of the reasons why you don't see development in those vacant lots year after year after year after year is because you can't attract private capital to these communities. And part of the reason why you can't attract private capital is because the development cost is so extraordinarily high. And so utilizing some of the infrastructure dollars to do some of that early stage pre-development work, whether it's for environmental testing, whether it's to lay a foundation for new housing, I think could be a very, very powerful use of infrastructure dollars that would spur economic development in ways that are unusual. Thank you.
Those are really powerful points and very, I keep thinking of the word particular, but that's nuance is the word I'm trying to think of. Nuanced ideas about infrastructure and how we prioritize spending. So I do just want to back them up and hopefully strengthen them with a couple technical definitions. Director Lucas or somebody from DOMI, if you want to explain what curb cuts are and what ADA ramps are, because they're both really crucial to the pedestrian network, but in different ways. And so I don't know if anybody just wanted to kind of level set with those two terms.
Sure. So for curb ramps, think of the ramps that are typically positioned at intersections, sometimes referred to as ADA ramps, which is the Americans with Disabilities Act. And they are intended for pedestrians to be able to get from the street level to the sidewalk level and vice versa. Curb cuts, by contrast, are typically not located at the corners, and they are generally for vehicular access, though they often do serve pedestrians and people using mobility devices as well. And we recently, in the last 2 years, established stronger curb cut guidance as well, so that we have them in the right locations and we don't have too many curb cuts, because the more opportunities for vehicles to be crossing sidewalks, which is what curb cuts do, the higher chances there are of safety issues, because there's more opportunity for conflicts between vehicles and pedestrians.
Yeah, that's a really good point. As a runner too, on sidewalks, it always makes me nervous whenever I can see a curb cut. I have to look the other way, make sure a car's not coming out of a garage. So a couple more questions left. Laura made a good point about all 5 flights of city steps that have connected Center Avenue Business Corridor in bad shape or closed. Having them reopened would help connect Middle Hill and Terrace Village. So thank you for that comment. That's very important to consider too. To Marimba's point, there's a lot of important transit connections that we try to prioritize in our scoring with that 2018 steps plan. But now we've, to Director Lucas's point, more nuanced data about the cost of replacement, and hopefully we can go out and get those prioritized steps that are close to transit points. And then I think I'm going to wrap up with Brian's last question. Can you share any examples of innovative or exciting capital projects you've seen globally in the region that you find inspiring? No, I don't want innovative projects. I want tried and true, 99% success rate, really strong scientific backing. I want things I know are going to work, because when you're spending tax dollars, you're spending everybody's money. If you think about it, you need kind of a super consensus on what to do and how to, where to do it and how to do it. So I think it's really crucial to find things that are best in class, that have stood the test of time. I think of a lot of spheres that we work in, whether it is affordable housing or traffic calming. There are people who are doing amazing work, who can bring those projects to fruition through grant funds. We work with, Bloomberg Foundation, other people like that, to be able to try to test things that are a little bit more fringe that way. But in terms of spending city money, I want boring stuff. I want stuff that I know is gonna last 80 years and serve residents well.
If I can chime in real quick on that. So I think, you kind of hit the nail on the head with the balance of the work of our department. We're the work that's responsible for the core services, the bread and butter of maintaining our assets. And quite frankly, we have the infrastructure of a city that had a population twice the size of what we have today. So that responsibility is large. But we're also the department, as I started out by saying, that every single person that steps foot into the city of Pittsburgh consumes our services. And if we want to be a city that attracts people to move back in, to grow that population back to a place where it can support that infrastructure, we also are responsible for programs that make this a place that people want to be. People don't always make decisions about where they want to be because they know that the infrastructure is being maintained perfectly, though we want that to be the case. They also want to move places where they can walk, where they can get to a grocery store, where their kids are safe getting and playing, outside of their homes. And we are the department that can help make that a reality. And so the innovative work that we do is in how we improve the safety of our roadways and use new devices. We were the first department to bring mini traffic circles to the city. We're experimenting with speed cushions. We are innovating by using tools that are tried and true in other places and bringing them to Pittsburgh. There are innovative projects that have happened here. For example, the I-579 CAT project that took a major roadway and covered it, and now we have a park that is deserving of some major activation so that people can really benefit from that additional green space. And I want us to be really innovative in how we do our core services. I want to make sure that we're really strategic in how we spend money so that we can have them go as far as possible. A part of the department's work that we weren't able to go into tonight, because quite frankly, we don't put capital money into it, but is quite innovative and pioneering, is our work with Move PGH. So the Mobility as a Service program that brought scooters to the city and also made easier connections between public transit, scooters, bikes, car share by getting the industry to put it all into one digital location, the transit app. And DOMI works to implement the physical location of co-locating those services, which are the mobility hubs. And the reason you don't hear about it is that by collaborating with those entities, we're not putting local dollars into that program, and in fact, for every scooter trip that's taken on our streets, money is set aside to go into infrastructure improvements. And so there's a lot of ways that we are pioneering as a department and as a city that is directly translating into benefit for our residents in our city that we're able to do without actually having to spend city dollars on it, at least not initially. And so I think that's one of the ways that we've really been able to advance and innovate without necessarily having to directly invest in it by working with private sector partners when possible for programs.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think also innovation can come in people just changing their minds. Like I said, I've been here 7 years. There was, I've seen a specific council member go from anti-bike to pro-bike infrastructure just because they realized that's what to Director Lucas's point, that's what the young families in their neighborhood want. That's what drives the real estate market, is having something that's bikeable, having something that's walkable, that doesn't require a car to get, bread and a coffee on a Saturday, or to get your kids to school. So those elements are really important, but sometimes innovation is kind of a hearts and minds campaign with people understanding kind of what the public wants and what it means to live in a city. So if there's no other questions, I promise there's just going to be 4 more slides and hopefully they're impactful. We're going to get through some of the ways in which you can keep impacting this process. So we're going to look at the survey in just a little bit, but just so you understand what we do with those survey results, we do a summary of all the results as part of the capital budget each year. It's just part of kind of our outreach summary for the whole process. We make sure that we're sharing the data on how people are responding to the prompts in the survey. We also, again, I'm going to show you in a little bit, tag the responses by department, sometimes by project type, oftentimes by council office, and then we share out a master list with all the responses. So the departments, the council offices can just filter for things that are germane to them. They may want to put a request in for the 2023 capital budget. And then all the conversation we've had today, we've taken some notes. We've got a great kind of chat going already, but we'll go backwards through that and talk through how we can move some of the information and the questions that were put forth, like Marimba's points, to the right people to make sure that those get followed up on for possible capital projects in 2023. But yeah, our main tool right now in terms of outreach is Engage PGH. We have a specific page set up for the 2023 capital budget. It's just engage.pittsburghpa.gov. Once you're on the Engage website, there's a couple ways to find our page. Right now, we've got a really nice placement on the top row right here, 2023 City of Pittsburgh budgets, but you can always use the search bar to search for budget, and you can also look for projects happening in your neck of the woods by using those kind of cardinal directions as well. But we'll just take a quick tour of this year's capital and operating budget Engage pages. There's links on the side. If you want to register for the 2 meetings next week, you can do that right here. You can also check out the budgets themselves. There's videos from last year's meetings. There's some really great resources and interesting tools available to you through Balancing Act. We're going to try to pump those pretty hard again during that time period between the preliminary budget and the final budget. We can actually put that into that system, and you have the opportunity to do our jobs and move funding around to different projects that match your priorities. And then we have, who's listening and how to get in touch with us if you have any questions. But one of the big tools on here, in addition to the timeline too, I forgot about that, is the 2 surveys. So there's an operating and capital budget survey. We try to keep it pretty simple, but as impactful as possible. This was the map that was described earlier. You have the opportunity to add a marker for a specific capital projects need you may see in your neighborhood. Maybe for the strip district, you want to see bike infrastructure, you can type that in here and provide your email address if you want. Also, you can just type the projects out in these fields. Be as specific as you can. The more exact you are on the location, the easier it's going to be for me to kind of shuttle that response to the right council office. You also have the opportunity to talk about just overall in the city, what types of projects do you want to see more funding go towards? It doesn't have to be on this specific corner. I want to see a new ADA ramp. It can be, I just want to see better public sidewalks in the city overall. We'll record that data and use these data points as part of our scoring for public support whenever we get a project proposal in for public sidewalks. And then again, these are all the mayor's 2023 capital budget priorities. You can read through them and give your own feedback about how they kind of align with your values and what you want to see for the city next year. There's some demographic information at the end. I know sometimes it feels a little bit icky trying to fill out some of this demographic information. There's nothing to tie it back to anything. We can't find you through your survey responses. What this does do is let us know how accurate we are. We want to make sure that who's responding to this survey and to other public outreach data points is representative of Pittsburgh overall. To Director Lucas's point that they've made multiple times during tonight's meeting, oftentimes the people most in need have the least amount of resources to be able to ask for help. So we don't want public input only to be the driver. We want to use condition assessment. And then for the data we do get from the public, we want to make sure it's representative of the city overall. So these are just a couple real world examples of responses we've gotten in the past to the survey. This is kind of the back end spreadsheet that we had gotten responses 2 years ago to increase the funding for the Green Boulevard plan. And as you can see in the 2021 budget, that turned into funding for that really important strip district connection that's being established. That's going to be a really interesting project. It's going to take a while to do, but I'm excited to see it kind of coming to fruition. This is some other information we like to share just in terms of letting you know kind of for the survey responses we got in 2022. That's this pie on the right hand side. You can see the color coding for different project types. The big ones are this kind of orange, 38% is engineering and construction. In this blue, this 48% is facility improvement. And a lot of the DOMI projects are in this orange, engineering and construction. A lot of the DPW projects are in this blue for facility improvement. And then looking at the 2022 capital budget allocations, you can see that there is some parity between what we funded and what was commented on in the public survey. So we just want to let you know that we are listening. We do take all of your suggestions to heart. We try to share them to the right people, and we try to reflect your will and your voice in the survey, the meetings, and our scoring of the projects whenever we're making recommendations to the mayor's office. So just to close out, we want to give you some additional tools. I need to remove Berg's eye view. I think it's officially offline. It was a great tool we had for a while that was a layer that showed all of the capital projects that were kind of live in the city. But as always, you can reach out to 311. That's their Twitter handle. If you have any questions about specific infrastructure or concerns you want to share, that's the fastest way to get it into city hands. I have some of these people's email addresses and phone numbers, and I still use 311. So 311 is a great resource. You can also reach out to our team either by going to our website, pittsburghpa.gov/OMB, or you can email the capital team specifically with CIP for Capital Improvement Program at pittsburghpa.gov. As always, please feel comfortable and confident talking to your elected officials about what you want to see in next year's budget. That's part of their job. So feel comfortable doing that. And then we're going to be launching, it's already up now, but we're going to be really promoting and launching in the fall Balancing Act, which again is that kind of budget simulator that will allow you to move the money around. So you can give us feedback on the mayor's preliminary budget in ways that hopefully improve it for the final budget in November. That's all I had for tonight. Does anybody have any questions before we close up? I'm gonna stop sharing. If not, again, I really want to thank our ASL interpreter. I want to thank the neighborhood services team. I want to thank INP. I know that they've got personal lives too, and they stay extra and stay late and come in early for a lot of these meetings to help facilitate connections between our teams and the public that really could not happen otherwise. So again, thanks to all three of those parties for your work on this. And thanks to DOMI. They always do such amazing day-to-day work, but it's really interesting for me as a resident just to sit back and listen to some of the innovation they've been coming up with in the past year. I'm excited to see what their proposals are for 2023. With that, I'm going to close out. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to email us at CIP@pittsburghpa.gov. Thanks. Have a good night.